The season reviews continue. It's time for the Cleveland Browns, the poor old Cleveland Browns and their 3-14 season. What do they do from here? Let's go. Good morning, everybody. Curtis DeBoy here with you on the Outback QB Daily podcast, the Muscle Cat Media Network. All happening here. This episode's brought to you by the Stubby Club. Remember, we've got our new show, the Outdoor Ginger Podcast. As I said, it's all happening. Now, before we get into another, what is a fairly depressing season review, but it does have some positives, so hang in there. There is some news from yesterday that you've probably seen by now, and that is Tommy Telesco, the general manager of the Raiders, of course, formerly of the Chargers. He's been sacked 2 days after Antonio Pierce. The news came out yesterday. He's been sacked as well. So it's head coach gone, general manager gone from the Raiders. Tommy lasted 1 year in Las Vegas. So it's a complete rebuild yet again. Now the Vikings-Rams game as well, that's been moved from LA to Arizona due to the fires. So it won't be played at SoFi. It'll be played at the home of the Cardinals. Crazy situation there. I don't know if you guys have seen, I'm sure you've all seen the pictures, but you can look at aerial shots of LA before and after the fires and all the areas affected. It is apocalyptic. It is like looking into the depths of hell. Very interesting stuff. All right. Let's get into the season review for the Browns. What are we looking at here? 3-14, the Cleveland Browns, 4th in the AFC North. I Googled the Browns as you know, the base for the research before I stemmed off into all the different stat pages and footage and all that sort of stuff. And when you Google the Cleveland Browns, you know how on Google it then comes up with 4 or 5 questions of other people also asked? The first result in that section was, have the Browns ever had a good season? Which is a valid question to ask, but people forget they actually made playoffs last year. Not with Deshaun Watson, but with Joe Flacco, because Watson had the shoulder injury last year, so Flacco, at 40-odd years of age, led them to the playoffs. They lost in the wild card to Houston. So we were all singing their praises because on the back of the defense and some smart coaching from Kevin Stefanski, who was coach of the year, they somehow got to the playoffs. They could not repeat the magic this year. Of course, Deshaun Watson started again at the start of this year. Tore his Achilles, has recently had a setback in his rehab. Will he ever play for them again? Who the heck knows? Jameis Winston then deputized. He brought some fun at least. At least they were fun and entertaining to watch. And then Dorian Thompson-Robinson sucked all the fun out of that room when he came into play. And then we ended with Bailey Zappi. So another year of, last year they had five quarterbacks playing. This year they had 4. They were the lowest scoring team in the league. 15 points per game. They had 23 last year. So they've dropped massively there. They were one of the worst defenses as well, conceding 25 points per game compared to 22 last year. Now, like I have done with every team and will do with every team, 2 highlights, 2 lowlights. Believe it or not, there were highlights. There were 2 of their 3 wins. They were against divisional rivals. They somehow beat Baltimore. They somehow beat Pittsburgh, which is huge. I mean, if you look at that in isolation, you think they've had a good year. It's just the other 15 games that were a worry. Number 2, individual performances. Guys like Jerry Jeudy, who came across from Denver for a 5th and 6th round pick, started slowly, went crazy. 1,229 yards, had that huge game against his former team, which they lost, in which he went 235 yards and a touchdown. He was enormous. Myles Garrett was brilliant again. Outside of Aiden Hutchinson, the best pass rusher in football, and Garrett played the whole year, so he gets the gong this year. 14 more sacks, 83 pressures, tied with Trey Hendrickson of Cincinnati, who also had a huge year. And then on top of that, Denzel Ward, one of their cornerbacks. They had a bad year as far as the secondary is concerned. In fact, pretty much everyone else around him fell apart, but Denzel Ward had 19 passes defended, which was the most in the league. So he did a great job. So did Garrett, so did Jeudy, but unfortunately they didn't have enough guys helping them. The lowlights, we know the continued plague that is Deshaun Watson, his performance, the money, the Achilles, 2 more years of that, which will continue to haunt them. So I'm going to put that aside, and it's too obvious to use. So the first lowlight I'm going to say is their O-line, which used to be the best in football. 2 years ago, these guys, Ethan Pochik, Joel Bitonio, Wyatt Teller, as a combination, they were the best. They're the best O-line in football. And now, I mean, they were absolutely destroyed by injuries. So it doesn't help. And they had to shift Bitonio to left tackle at some point because they kept losing guys. Jedrick Wills and others, who cycled through there were out for significant amounts of time. So they were decimated by injuries, but they also lost Bill Callahan, who he's Brian's dad. He went to Tennessee. He's an O-line coach, essentially. He was the O-line coach at Cleveland when they were going really well, and then he went to go coach with his son, which was cool. But that seemed to really hurt the Browns. So the injuries plus losing their mastermind, they were one of the lower half O-lines in the league, and they conceded, it wasn't ridiculous amounts of sacks, but enough to have whichever quarterback was playing running for their lives a lot more than normal. So that hurt. The other part is their rookie class. Now, this was a confronting stat about how much these guys played, whether it's through injury or form or whatever. Most teams had at least one rookie that played over 1,000 snaps, so basically a full season. When I say most, I would say definitely more than half. Cleveland did not have a rookie who played more than 233 snaps. That's a quarter of a season, less than a quarter of a season. Zach Zinter, their guard, Michael Hall Jr., they were their two top picks, and of course they didn't have a first rounder last year because of Deshaun Watson. They played 233 and 232 snaps respectively. Zinter struggled mightily at guard. Hall was okay as a defensive interior guy, but they each played a quarter of a season. The rest of their guys played 140, 140, 130, and then below that, nobody played more than 55 snaps. Their rookies got basically no exposure. Basically nothing. 2 of them had a quarter of a season. 3 of them had an eighth of a season. The rest didn't play. So when you look at this team and go, wow, 3-14, they don't know who their quarterback is, but do they at least have some young blood coming through? No, they don't. None of them played effectively. It's the worst possible. It's the worst possible combination. Their stars are getting older. Garrett's not getting any younger. They don't know the quarterback, and their rookies aren't playing. So where the heck do you go from here? Well, we'll get to their draft, their upcoming needs in just a second. But let's have a look at their stat leaders like we do with every team. It makes for interesting reading. Quarterbacks, well, we won't really bother with Watson. He played 7 games, only 5 touchdowns. Jameis Winston, it's a typical Winston stat line. He was amazing when he was amazing. He was terrible when he was terrible. 13 touchdowns, 12 interceptions in his game. That's typical of him. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, no touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He now has the worst career ratio of anyone, I think, with more than 1 touchdown. At least 1 touchdown, because career he has 1 touchdown. Bailey Zappi ended up playing. That was just the one game. Running game. They had no running game. Nick Chubb came back, but he's not the same guy. And that's not Nick's fault. He's getting older and had a horrible ACL, MCL, PCL injury. The fact that he's even back and was walking, then running, now playing NFL is incredible in itself. But he went for 300 yards. Jerome Ford just 560 yards. So they need a running back, but it's a luxury position, and I'm not sure they're there yet. So it's probably they'll pick up a Pollard or someone like that, Tony Pollard, equivalent talent in free agency. I wouldn't spend a high draft pick on it in their situation. Receivers, Jerry Jeudy, we said 1,200 yards, but beyond that, it's a dearth of talent. Elijah Moore, 500. David Njoku, 500, but he only played 11 games. We know he's a good tight end. Outside of that, there's really nothing much. They traded out Amari Cooper for that 3rd-round pick next year, or in this upcoming draft now, I should say. They also got a 7th in 2026. Defense is a little better. We've got Myles Garrett, who's the highlight with 14 sacks, like I mentioned. Zadarius Smith, before he left, had 5 sacks, but he's gone to Detroit. Dalvin Tomlinson on the defensive interior just had the 3 sacks. Their linebackers had a pretty good year. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was pretty good. In the games he played half a season, I'd say. But when he did play, he was good. But again, that's more of an injury curse for these guys. Passes defended, I said that Denzel Ward absolutely dominated there, but the other corners, Emerson, Newsome, they really, really struggled, and no one stood out with interceptions. It was just 2 for Ward, 1 for JOK, and 1 for Newsome. So they had a pretty bad year in that secondary. And then kicking-wise, and this was another disaster. Man, I don't mean to be so negative. These are inevitably going to be negative because at the moment I'm going through the 3-win, 4-win teams. But Dustin Hopkins, their kicker, he made 66% of his field goals this year. That's ridiculously bad for new people. That's ridiculously bad. 18 of 27. Wowzers. 4 of 8 beyond 50. He missed at least 1 field goal in every category of distance. He also missed 3 extra points. So They don't have the kicking situation sorted either. But where did that land these guys in our MVP? Well, no surprises. Myles Garrett was right up there. In fact, he was the highest defender in the league. No, he was second. Second to TJ Watt. Let me just double check that because Garrett got 30 votes. I've got it sorted by team at the moment. Let me just scroll down to Pittsburgh. Yeah, TJ Watt got 39. Garrett got 30. He had a very, very good season. That's a lot of votes in a 3-win team. Second was Jerry Jeudy with 14. Third was Jordan Hicks, the linebacker who joined them recently with 8 votes. Jameis Winston picked up 8. Njoku 4. And then it's a bunch of guys who just polled in one game. JOK, Watson, Tillman, Ward, Newsom, Zadarius Smith, Cooper, and Maguire. Now, it's a bit harsh on Ward to only have a couple of votes there because he did have a better season than that. But again, when your secondary is getting beaten up every week, and he didn't have great interception numbers either. So that's why he didn't poll as high as perhaps he should have, but it makes sense that Garrett and Jeudy were their top 2. Let's get to their off-season needs because we've covered the guys they brought in, Jerry Jeudy. We covered the guys that went out in Zadarius Smith and Amari Cooper. So the question I'm going to ask is, how is Andrew Berry, the general manager, still holding on to his job? This is his 4th year there. He's responsible for the Watson trade. I mean, I know the owners probably overrode him, but still, it's on his resume. The drafting's been bad. They didn't play any rookies this year. They went 3-14, and they're in an absolute hole. Do they trust him, Andrew Berry, to have this draft with the number 2 overall pick and the most important draft in many, many years for Cleveland? Interesting. Given the discussion about GMs getting sacked this week, I find it very interesting that there is not more heat on Andrew Berry. So look, they finally have their first-round draft pick for the first time in 3 years due to Deshaun Watson. Like I said, picking number 2 overall. They have their second-round pick. They have 2/3 because of that Amari Cooper trade, so they're set up. Where do they need to look? Well, look, linebackers were okay. I think you sorted there Devin Bush, Jordan Hicks, JOK. D-line, I don't think that's an immediate concern. You've got Garrett. You've got other guys that are competent at least in Tomlinson and co. Wide receivers, that's an area that you probably need some bolstering because outside of Jerry Jeudy, there's not much. But unfortunately, there are areas of need that are even greater. Quarterback is one. They're going to have to take a quarterback. If they're serious, they're going to have to take a quarterback. They have to sit Deshaun Watson. He's going to be their backup on ridiculous money for the next 2 years because he's not a guy. He's not a guy who can win you consistent games at NFL level anymore. He's just not. Whether it's a mental thing or a physical thing or I don't know what it is, but we all know he's a ghost of his former self. So surely they go for a quarterback with pick 2. They also need cornerbacks. Denzel Ward can't do it by himself. The other guys they've shown this year that they can't sustain their quality of performance. They need help in the secondary, particularly at corner. So that's number 2. I had a very close to left tackle. They need a left tackle to complement the other guys who are normally good on the O-line because that position is a problem for them at the moment. Injury or form, whatever. They just can't find the right guy there at the moment. So quarterback, cornerback, left tackle, and then running back / wide receiver. Like I said, I don't think they really need to focus on a running back at the moment. They can pick someone up fairly cheap who can do the job competently. They don't need a superstar there. A lot of draft people have already said that Cleveland need a running back as one of their bigger needs, but I'm actually going to put wide receiver above it because Jeudy shouldered almost all the load this year, and that was only in the second half of the year when he caught fire. So I think he needs a proper wide receiver too. So maybe draft one of those before a running back. But that's Cleveland. That's the Cleveland Browns. They're an intriguing operation to watch because they do things differently and more often than not, they do things the wrong way. But when they get going, it's like the Jets. There's this groundswell of optimism, or not optimism, a groundswell of intrigue around them when they finally start to perform. And we had that last year when they went to the playoffs with Flacco, but it just hasn't happened again. All right, that's the Browns.